I was 22, fresh out of college, and still figuring things out. My father ran a modest but respected window frame business. We weren't wealthy, but we lived comfortably. My mom stayed home, always making sure dinner was ready by 6. Life was steady, predictable. Then one afternoon, everything changed. I was in the hallway, headed toward the kitchen, when I overheard my father's voice through the slightly ajar door to his study. "No, absolutely not. I won't let you take over my company. I've worked too hard for this." I froze. He sounded tense, angrier than I'd ever heard him. I knew I shouldn't listen, but I did anyway. My stomach turned as I realized something was terribly wrong. That night, over dinner, Dad was his usual self-cracking jokes with Mom, complimenting her overcooked pot roast, but I could see the stress behind his eyes. The smile didn't quite reach his face. I knew I had to do something. I didn't know much about business, but I wasn't going to sit by and watch everything he built collapse. The next day, I did some digging. It didn't take long to find the name Robert Caldwell, a well-known businessman, ruthless in his acquisitions. He wanted my father's company. His office wasn't far from our house, so I went there. The receptionist stared at me like I was lost. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No," I said, trying to stay calm. "But it's important, just 5 minutes, please." She hesitated, then made a call. A minute later, she waved me toward the elevator. "Top floor." When the doors opened, I found myself face to face with Robert Caldwell. He was older than I expected, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and far too amused by my presence. Well, he said, looking me over, "what do we have here?" "I'm Julia Thompson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm here about my father's company, Thompson Windows." His eyebrows shot up. "Thompson's daughter. This is unexpected. Come in." I followed him into his office, resisting the urge to gawk at the skyline view behind his desk. "So, Miss Thompson," he said as he settled into his chair, "what can I do for you?" I took a breath. "Please don't take over my father's company. It means everything to him. There must be another way." He leaned back and smiled a slow, calculating smile. "Interesting. I have a proposition. I'll back off, leave your father's company alone, if you agree to marry my son." I stared at him, thinking I misheard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Marry him. Make him grow up a little. Do that, and your father's business stays intact." I walked out of his office in a daze. Marry his son. It sounded insane. But the more I thought about it, the fewer options I had. The next day, I walked back into Caldwell's office, heart pounding. "So, Miss Thompson," he said, that smug smile still on his face, "have you made your decision?" I nodded once. "Yes, I'll do it." "Excellent," he said. "Let me introduce you." And just like that, my life changed forever. I Caldwelled me through a set of double doors into a smaller, more casual room. That's when I met him, Jack Caldwell, the man I had just agreed to marry. I expected a stiff, corporate type, maybe someone with slicked back hair and a superiority complex. Instead, Jack stood up with a crooked smile, tousled dark hair, and an easygoing air that didn't match his father's intensity at all. "Hey," he said, extending a hand, "I'm Jack. You must be Julia." I shook his hand, trying not to show my confusion. "Yeah, that's me." His father cleared his throat and quietly left the room, closing the doors behind him. The moment he was gone, Jack's smile faded and his shoulders slumped. "So I'm sorry about this," he said, running a hand through his hair. "My dad has some interesting ideas." "It's fine," I replied, forcing a smile. "We're both adults. We'll figure it out." He laughed, but it was hollow. "Right, just a totally normal arranged marriage, no big deal." We talked for about an hour. Surprisingly, Jack wasn't awful. He was smart, had a dry sense of humor, and didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. He admitted he'd spent most of his 20s drifting, partying, avoiding responsibility. Now, thanks to his father's ultimatum, he was about to become a husband. I didn't know what I had expected, but it certainly wasn't someone who seemed just as trapped as I was. Over the next few weeks, we started going out together, if you could call it dating. Dinners, events, public appearances. Everything staged to make it seem like love brought us together. But underneath the surface, the truth was clear. This was a business transaction dressed in white lace and champagne. Still, somewhere along the way, a fragile friendship started to form. Jack could be funny when he wasn't trying to be. He listened when I talked. And though we rarely touched, he was never unkind. 6 months later, I walked down the aisle in a dress that didn't feel like mine, toward a man I barely knew. My father looked so proud his company was saved, and he thought I had found love. He had no idea I had sold my future to protect his. As I stood beside Jack, exchanging vows that felt more like legal terms than promises of love, I saw something in his eyes. Not affection, but something close to understanding. Maybe that was enough. The reception was a blur. Well-wishers, clinking glasses, too much champagne. Jack's mother, Elizabeth, cornered me near the dessert table. "Welcome to the family, dear," she said, her smile as sharp as glass. "I do hope you'll make Jack happy." I smiled back, lips tight. "I'll certainly try, Mrs. Caldwell." As we left for our so-called honeymoon, I caught a glimpse of Robert Caldwell across the room. He was beaming like a man who had just closed a deal. In a way, he had. That night, in the hotel room, Jack poured us both a glass of wine. We clinked glasses in silence. No kiss, no celebration. Just two strangers bound by obligation, staring out a window into the unknown. This wasn't love. But maybe in time it could become something close. The first few months of marriage felt like a slow-motion performance, dinners with the in-laws, charity galas, pictures for the society pages. We smiled, we posed, and then we went home and retreated into separate corners of the same house. Jack was polite, even thoughtful at times, but there was no intimacy, no connection beyond the bare minimum. We were more like housemates than spouses, stuck in a beautiful cage built by someone else's expectations. Still, I tried. I cooked, I cleaned, I asked about his day. I made excuses for him when he skipped board meetings or slept until noon. I told myself he was adjusting, that eventually we'd find a rhythm. Then came the doctor's appointment that changed everything. We had been trying half-heartedly for a baby. It felt like the one thing that might bring us closer, make this strange marriage feel real. But after months of disappointment, we agreed to get checked out. The doctor's voice was calm, almost too gentle. "I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell. The results show that you are unable to father children." The words echoed in the sterile room. Jack didn't say a word. He just stared at the floor, jaw tight. I tried to smile, to offer comfort, but I felt the loss in my own chest. Not just the loss of a child, but the loss of a future I had quietly built up in my mind. The one where we became something real. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I thought of my parents, of my father, who had always worked so hard, and my mother, who found meaning in every small act of care. I didn't want to just exist in someone else's narrative. I wanted purpose. And the next morning over breakfast, I brought it up. "Jack, I've been thinking. I want to work." He looked up from his phone, surprised. "Work? Why?" "Because I want to do something that matters. Something that's mine." He set the phone down, shaking his head. "Julia, we have more than enough money. Wives in our circle don't work. They do charity, start a foundation or something." His dismissal stung more than I expected, but instead of arguing, I took his advice, sort of. The Julia Caldwell Foundation for Children with Cancer was born that spring. At first, it was just a name. But soon I was organizing events, coordinating with hospitals, visiting families. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was doing something real. Jack didn't care much. He applauded when cameras were around, but otherwise he was distant. He spent more time with his friends again, late nights, drinks, laughter that never included me. We became strangers again, living parallel lives under the same roof, each lost in our own version of disappointment. Still, I held on to hope. Maybe one day the foundation would grow. Maybe one day we would too. But life had other plans. It was a warm September morning when everything shifted again. Jack's father, Robert Caldwell, died suddenly of a heart attack. No warnings, no long goodbye. One minute he was the indestructible patriarch, and the next he was gone. Just like that, Jack became CEO of Caldwell Enterprises. I tried to be supportive. I brought him coffee in the mornings, left encouraging notes on his desk, reminded him of his strengths. But the pressure was immediate, and it showed. Jack was overwhelmed. The company had been propped up by his father's experience and control. Without him, it was a storm Jack wasn't prepared to weather. The late nights returned, but now they weren't about friends or fun, they were about stress. About failure. Jack stopped coming home for dinner. He barely spoke to me. When I asked how work was going, he'd grunt or wave me off. 2 years later, as if fate hadn't thrown enough at us, his mother Elizabeth was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. "We should move her to a care facility," Jack said flatly when the doctor broke the news. "They'll handle everything." But Elizabeth refused. "I will die in my own home," she said, her voice strong despite the diagnosis. So I stepped in. After years running a children's cancer foundation, I knew the system. I hired the best nurses, coordinated her medication, scheduled in-home visits. I spent hours by her bedside, adjusting her pillows, helping her eat, reading aloud from her favorite novels. At first, her usual disdain clung to every word. "You don't have to play the martyr, Julia," she muttered once. But over time, the ice cracked. One quiet afternoon, as I was tucking a blanket around her shoulders, she caught my hand. Her voice, so often cold, was suddenly soft. "You're a good woman, Julia. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." The words hit me harder than I expected. I managed a nod, blinking back tears. But while Elizabeth grew weaker, Jack seemed to unravel. He stopped showing up to meetings. He started drinking more. His mood swung wildly from distant to angry, and the worst part, he no longer pretended to care. I knew we were drifting apart, but I told myself we were under stress, that things would settle once the dust cleared. Then one night Jack came home smelling like whiskey, his tie askew, and eyes bloodshot. I sat him down in the living room. "Jack," I said gently, "we need to talk. You haven't been to the office. Your assistant called. People are worried." He laughed a sharp, bitter sound. "The office? That ship's already sinking. Dear old Dad left me a mess I can't fix." I stared at him. "But what about your mother? The company? Us?" He leaned back, glass in hand. "I'm just waiting for her to go. When she does, I'll sell her house and get out of this town." I froze. "She's your mother, Jack." He shrugged. "She's a reminder of a life I never wanted, just like this marriage." The last piece of hope I'd been clinging to cracked. And I knew then something inside me was beginning to shift. It was a rainy Tuesday when the call came. My parents had been flying to Hawaii's second honeymoon, something they'd always dreamed of, but never had time for. Their plane went down over the Pacific, no survivors. The grief was instant, paralyzing, like the world had been split in half and I was stuck on the wrong side of it. I expected Jack to be there, even just to stand next to me, say nothing and say voyager. But he didn't show up, not to the hospital, not to the service, not even a text. Nothing. At the funeral, I stood alone, watching 2 caskets lower into the ground, the drizzle mixing with tears I didn't even try to wipe away. Everyone else faded into the background. The only thing I could feel was emptiness and anger. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't break. I packed up my pain and turned it into fuel. The next morning, I went to my father's company. My company now, I supposed. The moment I stepped into his old office, I stopped cold. Jack was sitting in Dad's leather chair, legs up on the desk, barking orders into the phone like he owned the place. "Jack," I said, my voice tight, "we need to talk." He looked up, annoyed. "What now, Jules? Can't you see I'm busy?" "Busy," I snapped. "You weren't busy enough to come to my parents' funeral." He rolled his eyes. Here we go again. The guilt trip. "Look, Julia, you're always moralizing, always nagging. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of you." I stared at him in disbelief. Then he leaned forward, his voice suddenly calm, too calm. "You know this company. It's worth about $17 million. And as deputy director, I've got full access. Passwords, accounts, everything." My stomach turned. "What are you saying?" He smiled, smug. "I've already transferred a good chunk to my personal account. You think I sat around doing nothing? No, I planned this." "You can't do that," I whispered. "Oh, I already have." And while we're at it, he opened the drawer, pulled out a thick envelope, and tossed it on the desk here. "Divorce papers. Let's stop pretending this marriage ever meant anything." I stood frozen, the weight of everything crushing me. My parents gone. My marriage over. My father's company stolen. I walked out in silence, the envelope clutched in my hand. But as the glass doors shut behind me, something hardened in my chest. No more bending, no more pretending. It was time to fight back. I drove straight to my father's lawyer. Mr. Henderson had known Dad for decades. He greeted me with kind eyes and a quiet voice. "I'm so sorry, Julia," he said. "How can I help?" I told him everything, the betrayal, the money, the papers. He listened without interrupting. Then, slowly, he opened a file on his desk. "Your father made some last-minute changes before the accident," he said. "You need to hear this." And for the first time in days, I felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses and slid a stack of papers across the desk. "This," he said gently, "is your father's final will and testament. He updated it just 2 weeks before the accident. Julia, he left everything to you. I blinked. Everything? He nodded. The company, the estate, all personal and business accounts. You are the sole beneficiary. A wave of emotion rose in my throat, but he wasn't finished. There's more. 2 weeks before his death, your father fired Jack. Removed him from all responsibilities. Legally, he has no position at the company, no authority. His title as deputy director. Gone. I stared at him, stunned. So the money Jack moved was an illegal transfer, Mr. Henderson finished. And we can prove it. I've already started the paperwork to freeze the accounts. I sat back, letting it all sink in. Jack hadn't won. Not even close. Then Mr. Henderson pulled one last item from the file, a sealed envelope with my name written in my father's handwriting. With trembling fingers I opened it. My dearest Julia. If you're reading this, then I'm no longer by your side, and that breaks my heart. But I need you to know this: I saw everything. I knew about the sacrifices you made. The marriage, the silence, the strength. This company is yours now, not because you married into it, but because you earned it. You protected it when I couldn't. It's time to let go of Jack. You've given him enough. Live for yourself now. Build your own legacy. I'm so proud of you. Love always. Dad. And tears spilled freely as I clutched the letter to my chest. For so long I had questioned whether he knew, whether he saw what I had endured, and here it was, his love, his trust, in ink. I looked up at Mr. Henderson, eyes burning with the new fire. Do you have a pen? He smiled and handed one over. Without hesitation, I signed the divorce papers Jack had flung at me like an insult. Each stroke felt like freedom. When I was done, I handed them to Mr. Henderson. Can you file these? Gladly, he said. I stood straighter than I had in years. Jack had taken his best shot. But I was still standing. And now I was in control. The next few months were a whirlwind, but not the kind that knocks you down. With Mr. Henderson's help, we reclaimed every dollar Jack had stolen. He tried to fight it, of course slandered me in front of the board, twisted the story in the media. But the facts didn't lie: the will, the illegal transfers, the signed termination. He had no case, no company, no power. And soon, no wife. The divorce went through quickly. Jack left the city, vanished into the background like a fading shadow. He had always been a man built on borrowed confidence. Once the foundation cracked, there was nothing left. But me! I rebuilt everything. I stepped into my father's shoes not as a daughter filling a gap, but as a woman stepping into her own. I restructured the company, expanded our operations, and even merged with my foundation to offer meaningful career programs for cancer survivors and their families. Every decision I made honored my parents' legacy. Every success was mine to own. And I never again apologized for wanting more. For anyone listening, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or pushed into a life that wasn't yours, let this be your reminder. You don't owe your loyalty to people who gamble with your worth. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't loud. It's living fully, truthfully, and without fear. If Julia's story resonated with you, share it. Leave a comment. Tell us what you've overcome and how you rose. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming power, rewriting your ending, and rising on your own terms. Because